Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at Contract Brewing 101. Today's presenter is going to be the esteemed Dan Bronson of 24/7 Packaging. He's the business development and
I pick up the phone.
he picks up the phone at 24/7. And Dan just told me that he was awarded
Oh yeah, I mean if you want the full buy.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's Southern California regional champion for ultimate estimating.
Ultimate estimating for fourth grade. So he's had these skills his whole life in a latent form.
Yeah, and during Q&A, I will guess your weight and height for free.
I'll hold you to it.
He overestimates your height and underestimates your weight. He already played this game with me.
It's a good game.
Yeah, he won. Without further ado, Dan Bronson.
Awesome, thanks everybody. Super fun to get to present to a room where you know half the faces. That's a rare treat. If you're a little curious about where I'm from, 24/7 Packaging is a relatively new entity. We were formerly Single Cut North, a production facility up here in the capital region. Under new ownership and new management, we've just finished a pretty massive expansion, so we now facilitate and handle all kinds of products, beer, RTDs, NARTDs, all that kind of cool stuff. And thanks for the incredible introduction. Jeff has been a personal influence and someone I've looked up to for, I think recounting it, I think it did meet you 15 years ago.
Goodness.
Just about, right when you came back down to the Hudson
sure.
Valley region. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about contract brewing today from kind of both sides a little bit. So the subtitle of this short presentation, which of course we'll do some Q&A afterwards, is keeping the spirit of craft in contract brewing or co-packing. So whether you're going to stick in beer, you're going to work on some new stuff, we're going to kind of talk about everything here. And what I want to kind of start from the very top is asking kind of the most important question. Is contract brewing the right fit for your brand? Now, we can have a side conversation. I'd be happy to chat with anybody is if it's a good fit for your business. I think those are slightly different conversations. We're going to touch on both of them, but this is the first and kind of existential question you need to ask yourself. How does it fit for my brand? You know, brands are incredibly valuable, as we all know, but also we have to look out for our bottom lines. We balance this all day, every day. So I would challenge you, if you're thinking about taking your brand on a contract route, to ask yourself these three questions. A, and this is the most important one, what's your brand story? How impactful is that for your business model? If you're a 6 Main Street brewing company and you decide you want to have 100% contract, that's probably going to have some different factors you need to think about before moving that direction. From a business perspective, how does your business model work with lower margins and also lower liability? Yes, your overhead's going to go down immensely, but you're going to be employing a middle person to facilitate production for you. Be very, very thoughtful. Spend as much time with an Excel sheet as you do having conversations with your team and your peers and finding out what it does for your brand. And then I think kind of the big question, and maybe the one that is most on everybody in this room's mind, are you comfortable trusting another brewer? Good contract partners have trust, great communication, and work really, really well with each other. And a big part of that, and nobody loves to talk about it, but it's the truth, compromise comes with that. Realistic expectations, and a really keen focus on what the goals are. So the first thing you got to think about is finding a partner that's true. Some super important stuff, but obviously we're not going to cover everything here. Location and logistics are major. You want to be able to access the facility, of course. In my experience, I think probably Jeff shares this, there's going to be a curve on how active you're going to want to be there, right? But at the beginning, you're probably going to want to be there quite a bit. But your own personal transportation is important. Think about how your pallets are going to move also. Are you moving a lot of pallets far away? Make sure that's a thoughtful consideration because shipping costs can really stack up. Make sure you're not assuming that your shipping is going to be the same from what you're doing currently at your home facility. Also, think about the pricing model. We're not going to get a ton into costs today. That's very, very unique and it's very personal to the relationship of any contract partnership. But there's a whole bunch of different models, tolling, services based. Happy to answer any questions on that. But make sure it's a model that works for you, and by that I mean that you understand it really well, and you have open communication with your partner about how you're getting billed, when you're getting billed, all that cool stuff. Capability, capacity, and quality. Of course, quality is going to be one of the things we think of first. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, about how we define quality and what are some of the metrics you're looking for. But always be sure to ask those important questions. What things do you do well? What things do I do really well that I think we can work together to grow mutually? But the most important one is, how much space do you have? How big can we grow together? Are you willing to make investments to continue growing together? And then the last one, I'm saving the existential ones for the end of the slide, right? Do you need a creative partnership or do you need a business partnership? Certainly you're going to need both, right? But if you're coming in saying, I've got some ideas, help me realize them, you want to work with someone who has the bandwidth, the ingenuity, the creativity, and frankly, the ability to help you realize those goals? Or are you coming in saying, I have 2 flagship beers, I have POs for the next year, and these are the dates I need them, and this is when I need them at? Great. That's a fantastic business partnership. You're going to be a best friend of any contract brewer, and you're off to the races. In my experience, here's some really good questions to ask to make sure that you're aligned with the partner that you're trying to find. Is contracting your actual priority? We see there's maybe more opportunities for contract brewing right now. That's awesome. More opportunity for you to find the perfect partner, but make sure that you're aligned. If you want this to be your full-time model for production, make sure that your partner shares that full-time contracting is their model as well. If there's a house brand that's growing as well, have that conversation in advance. Hey, when we all get busy, how am I going to be sure I can get tank time if you're having an exploding house brand? What's the plan when that happens? A great question too is just, what are your weak spots? That when I have conversations with clients or prospects or friends, that's what I want to talk about. Hey, here's the things that I don't do well. Here are the times that I've made a mistake, and this is how we made up for it. Everybody in this room is probably a very good brewer and knows what's going on with their beer. What are we going to do when those plans don't come to fruition? And then the last one, just talking for the Excel spreadsheet again, what bulk savings can you provide? If you're going to be working with a larger partner, where can we save together? Because you know you have another person in between you and your distributor or you and your final retailer that's going to be adding to the costs. So where can we find some savings to help mitigate that? How do they communicate? This is a huge one. Jeff and I were in here doing a little trial run earlier, and I think the one thing we both agree on is people who don't answer emails are tough partners, regardless of what the actual working relationship is like. How are you going to find out about your batches? How are you going to find out about scheduling? How are you going to find out what's going on with your beer, which can be in a tank for 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes? You're just kind of sitting there, you're kind of wondering, what's the mechanism that they're using for keeping you in the loop on how your project's doing? You can't be involved in making sure it's your beer if you don't know what's going on. So have that conversation early and have it often. Ask how involved you can or should be. In my experience, and I know I speak for Jeff too, it's a pretty open door policy. Your beverage is being made, get in here, let's do it. But that's not the case for every partner, especially for some larger partners. There are some restrictions about visitation and presence during a brew day. Ask them what success looks like to them. It kind of goes back to the priorities question as well. Do they want to be a really successful co-packer? Or do they want to be a co-packer long enough to get their brand back where they wanted it to be and then go back to just producing their brand again? If you're not aligned on that from day one, you're just kind of creating a problem for, year 2. And then I always like to ask my clients, and I like for them to ask me, what's the company's 2-year and 5-year plan? 5-year plans are so difficult. 2-year plans are harder. 2-year plans involve actual planning, some roots that are already kind of taking a hold in the ground, and some real tangible plans. It'll tell you a lot about who you're working with and where they're at. There's fantastic partners who are taking one day as it comes. I would question growth potential with somebody like that who's just waiting to see what comes next month. And then my favorite thing when you're finding a partner, if anybody else had a dad yelling at you this in Home Depot when you were a kid, I'm with you. You only get to pick 2 from the wheel. So there's a lot of co-packers who are really good at being fast and being quality. Be prepared to pay. You want it fast and cheap? Know what quality means to your brand, right? And then of course, if you want it good and cheap, it's awesome. It's going to take a while. Popular brewers, popular co-packers, lead times are the biggest concern, which we hear from clients over and over and over again. So if you find that Cinderella fit for what your brand priorities are, make sure you have that kind of mentally locked into your head. What are the 2 that they're strongest at? Well, now we found a partner, so we're going to get started. And we're going to start setting our expectations for like how a partnership's going to work. Recipe development for us is always the first step. I'm sure it's the thing you guys are the most concerned about too. Be very open with them. Understand it's a new system. Trust is key, so you have to have a good partner already. Some folks do pilots. We're not personally huge believers in pilots. I think it's some folks in this room probably share the same experience. 2 barrels does not translate to 50 barrels. We wish it would, but it really, really doesn't. So when you're getting ready for that first round of production, have a very clear plan and go into it understanding that the metrics can be there. The numbers, the decimal points, we can nail those. But the spirit and the soul of the beer probably lives somewhere in your team. And that's something that only makes its way into a contract can through development of relationship, lots of tasting, lots of communication, lots of thoughtful discussion on how we can improve going into the future. As a little bit of an aside, my favorite recommendation, especially for brewers, if you're looking to start a core brand with a contract partner, make a slightly different version of that beer and see if you can release it as a seasonal or a one-off. That'll give you an opportunity to work with your brewer, really taste where the strengths are, like what's the yeast character, like what were we really getting out of that recipe, but have 1 or 2 tweaks in there that you know about that can differentiate it. So you can send it to market with a new label and really get a lot of really great data to keep following up with that improvement plan without having to worry about putting your bread and butter out into the market, which is really, really good beer, but may have that, it's a little bit different quality to it. See how you can optimize. Same thing we talked about before. If you're going to work with a co-packer, they probably have silo. What's in the silo? Is it a nice base malt that we can sub in and save a ton of cash? See what they have for options for their grain delivery. Do they have a super sack system? In addition, the difference between bag price and super sack price is a mile. The difference between silo rates and super sack is still pretty good. But if you can get into those higher quantities and your co-packer can support that, now you're starting to find all those little savings that are going to offset the middleman margin that's in there. Talk about hops. Talk about hops a lot. Who in here is still contracting hops? Are we still ordering them? Ooh, that was a fast hand in the back. Dang. You guys need to get your ACL checked. That was really intense. Have a conversation with your co-packer. There's a very good chance that they also are maybe a little over-contracted, have some stuff to share with you at a great price. If you're planning on buying spot, that's cool too, but just talk with them. Maybe there's another customer that they have, which is buying something kind of similar. Maybe there's some bulk savings there. These are things that only happen if you keep communication open and you're open with your partner. We were talking about this earlier. I'm actually a big believer in this. The last point. I think that yeast should always be your number one COGS concern for your cost of goods sold, what actually goes into your product. Malt we can find savings on for sure. You can find hop savings based off of your recipe development and your own personal tastes, but generally when you're brewing in your own brewery and you're only concerned with your own product, probably a lot of us are going cone to cone, right? And we're utilizing multiple generations. That is very likely not a possibility with commercial sized co-packers. Now, if you're lucky, you work with a co-packer who has a propagation program where they're making fresh pitches of X, Y, or Z strain all the time. You can just buy straight from them. That's almost certainly going to be the most economical way to go. But plan for that. If you're only going to brew every 2 months, you're going to have to buy a fresh pitch each time. And if you want to do something very special that's not carried with your co-packer, that's a pretty major cost. So think about that. See if you can find some savings. I'm never going to tell you to just phone it in with your yeast. The yeast is obviously so incredibly important, but you do need to think about it in advance. That's an unexpected cost that can sneak up on folks when we're talking about contract brewing. I always like to recommend folks to have a clear goal of what they want to get out of their beer. And I think of that as the spirit or the soul of the beer. That's that intangible factor that might be represented in pH or your hop load. We don't know, but you know. And nobody's going to taste that beer the same way that you do. So before you get into the tasting portion of brewing with your co-packer, know that thing. What's the thing that makes your beer special? I was very blessed to get to be the general manager of a brewery for the last 10 years. And for me, I knew that answer immediately, like, oh, it's the pH on the beer. Like there's a zip to it when it's a healthy and correct brew. And I know that flavor, and I get that flavor for 30 days before it starts to subside. If I don't get that in the co-pack, then I want to go back, take it to the lab, talk about it, look at the metrics, see where we can improve. But that's going to be a really hard thing to communicate to someone who's making your beer for the very first time on a new system. So if you go into it knowing very specifically, this is the thing, this is the shining glint in the eye of my beer, you're going to get it. You're going to get it on that second round because your co-packer is going to understand. They're going to understand where your passion's at, and that's where our focus is going to go for the second round. And that's basically the next point too. Focus on what makes your beer special, for sure. This is the killer for everyone. If you haven't produced at scale like you're going to before, you're stepping up a little bit in terms of your batch size. Talk openly and often with your co-packer about what loss looks like. Loss is inevitable. We all know it. We see it on our own cellars. But if you're going on a larger canning line, hey, guess what? We got more hose, we got more startup, there's going to be more loss. Is it a smaller percentage of your overall beer? Very maybe. Who knows? But very likely it could be. But get that data in advance. Don't show up and have purchase orders set with your distributors for 100% yield. It's not going to happen, right? This is going to be a constant work in progress for all partnerships to really hone that in. We might get great numbers from the very, very beginning, but ask about it. What does your canner see? What does your kegger see? If I do canning and kegging on the same batch, what does that do to my loss? Maybe it's better off to plant alternating. Hey, I'm going to do a 100% run in 12-ounce cans, and then on the next run, I want to do 16-ounce cans, and I want to do half barrels. Fantastic. You have to manage that a little bit from your flow to your distributors or your retailers, but you probably just eliminated a ton of loss from your stream. And ask them what the scrap plan looks like. Hey, stuff happens. We all know that. It's inevitable. There's going to be a problem at some point. When the problem happens, what do you consider to be acceptable for loss or scrap? And when do we start triggering some form in our relationship where we're going to be able to have a rectifying conversation? That's always a tough one, right? Your co-packer is an extremely low margin business. They only survive on volume. So they're not going to necessarily want to jump right in front of this conversation either. So have it often. And then we get to quality. This is my favorite part. It's the thing I'm the most proud of for our team. I know I speak for Jeff with that too, and his team. Co-packers are producing all day, every day. Metrics for quality are what we live and die on. So just have that conversation. And when you're actually going to it, checking in on your beer is really important. Brew day, cool. We love having people. We're at the finish line, this really long onboarding process. We've negotiated contracts and recipes and all this stuff, right? And we're actually getting there. I see Stefan in the crowd. If I'm not mistaken, it is legally required now on a contract brew to get a picture of somebody dumping a bag of hops into the kettle. Is that right?
I think that's absolutely correct.
Okay, yeah. We'll loop back to that. The brew day is awesome. You can be so much more helpful to the crew by coming on day 6, day 7, giving us some guidance like, hey, how is this fermentation tasting? Like, how are we tracking? Yes, I can give you the pH, I can give you the gravity and all that stuff. You've been seeing it every day as it comes through our channels, but come and taste it. How are we doing on hitting that soul of the beer? Is it feeling right? Not just tasting right and reading right? And be open about what metrics are most important to you for quality. If you don't test for a DO at your home brewery, no worries. Just say that. And talk to your co-packer. Hey, what do you guys see on your average? Do you know what your quarterly average was last quarter? Those are really important. Obviously, it impacts quality of your beer. It impacts your shelf life. And you're about to have, hopefully a little bit more beer than you're used to. So knowing that it's hitting all of your quality standards and you're going to be tasting good for 3, 6, 9 months, whatever your code date is, that's the ticket. And then when you actually get to tasting the beer, I always recommend folks focusing on the only truly important question. Is it good? I'm going to talk again about that spirit of the beer. My experience, both as a customer and a service provider over the years, is nobody ever tastes a beer on the very first time and says that is 101% of what I expected. Because we're prideful. We made this with our own hands, now somebody else is making it for us. We're always going to have some constructive criticism. So the thing I always focus on, is it good? And did we hit the quality metrics, of course? And then getting into that next level, that's what the partnership is about. If you are a distributing brewery, which I think is the one business model that really thrives with contract brewing, ask your distributor. That's the best metric for knowing if the beer quality is there. We're sometimes a little bit too close to it, you know? So if you have your local sales rep who covers your home territory, or your sales manager, or your distributor, just give it to them and get their feedback. They'll be honest because, you know, their paycheck is on the line just as much as ours. And we as a co-packer, we want to know it too. Because again, we want to make sure that your customer's happy. If you're not growing, we're not growing. And that's one of the ways partnership can really thrive. I'm going to go a little bit faster here because I think we're eating up time. Storage and shipping, major, major, major. If you want to use your co-packer as a third-party logistics company, make sure they can do that in advance. I have yet to meet a co-packer who says, I've got so much refrigerated storage, no worries. You want to do 20 cases, mixed pallets? Not a problem. We've got so much time to do that. Make sure that that's a conversation had in advance so they understand. And if you need to use a third-party logistics company, those exist. And they're not really that expensive. You could factor that into your pricing, and maybe that Goldilocks co-packer that you want to work with is a great fit. Maybe you just have to use a third-party logistics company to help you build pallets and ship them out to your distributor. I know we all wish we could send out 100-case pallets of single SKU, but it's not always an option. All right. Planning for success, sometimes harder than planning for the failure. Scheduling strategy. This is probably the biggest change which happens when you go to a co-packing or contract brewing model. You don't really control the schedule anymore. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of other customers that your co-packer has to work with and a lot of competing priorities and schedules. So, which is why I always say, we ask for 3-month projections on a rolling basis from all of our partners without naming names. I never get a 3-month projection. We will do everything we can to work with you and get you scheduled. It's our job. We want you to succeed for sure. But if you can't generate 3 months out, just know you're not going to get that exact pickup week that you want, or your seasonal beer that you want to release. Your Oktoberfest has to drop the last week of August. If that's the case, I need your PO in March to make sure that that happens. So think about that. 3 months, necessary. If you can't generate 3 months, you're going to have problems. 6 months, greatest of all time. We're going to frame a picture of you and put it up in the brew house if you give us a 6-month projection. That doesn't mean a 6-month purchase order. It doesn't mean we're locking you in for what you're going to do in October. But if you can tell us what you think you're going to do in October and you're giving me I'm 65% on this. All day, every day. You're the favorite. And the early bird gets the word. That is the takeaway here. If you get in your orders early with a concrete plan, even if it changes a little bit, you're going to be in a really good position to hit those key dates with your partner. And as a little friendly reminder too, small batches, everybody wants a small batch. It's hard. So get your orders in early because those are the hardest thing to schedule regardless of the size of the brewery. If they support a 10-barrel batch, great. That means a lot of their partners are there because they want those 10-barrel batches every now and then. So if you want to do specialty stuff, plan way in advance. And be thoughtful a little bit too with the requests on the seller. Split batches and stuff like that are really amazing tools we have in our home breweries. It's very, very difficult to translate that over to a contract brewing method. So be thoughtful about that. If you want to do a specialty beer, you probably need to do a full batch of it. All right, let's talk about the Excel spreadsheet just a little bit one more time. I always like to focus on one or two key inputs that you want to see some cost savings over your first year working with your partner. And those are things you can know well in advance. Silo malts, killer. I look at those prices all day, every day from what bags compared to silos are. That's an immediate first question. And the first thing I would ask, what do you have for bulk malts? Things with yeast propagation, chemical supply costs and all those. Those are all really important things to have conversations about. A lot of these things are going to be built into your basic service fees, like chemical supplies, for instance, and all that kind of cool stuff. But just ask, hey, what are we looking at for 2026? You have any potential cost savings coming on board? Even if that cost savings basically works out to you just keeping your standard pricing, that's great. We all know everything gets more expensive every year. If we can figure out a way to keep you at the same rate multiple years in a row, that's a huge win for both of us. And that's something that just helps increase your margin. Maybe you have to do a market adjustment, on your pricing. That's more you get to keep. And then this kind of goes back to a previous conversation. Plan for your growth success. Ask them straight up, how much of your tank space are you going to allow me to have when I grow? If they have 2,000 barrels of tank space and their little mental plan is 1,500 barrels of that going to their house brand, well, 500. That's as much as I can get at any given time in the cellar, and that's if I'm the only other customer, which is not going to be the case. Have that question come up a lot. Make sure you're on the same page as your partner with that. Cool. Let's get into some common questions that come through. Here's some communication tips I really recommend to make sure that the beer stays the way you want it to. This is the bane of both sides. It's a quote. It's good, it's just not quite the same. That's the most important thing when you're tasting it for you to note, aside from is it good, right? But just remember, you're describing something that's not just sensory, it's emotional. So before you ring up your co-packer and be like, oh, there's just something not quite there, take some notes. It's like, hey, I'm noticing it's not quite as bright. Usually I notice a little bit more of this one particular flavor, or it's feeling like a little heavy on the palate, things like that. These are tangible work items that we can really work on together and get there. So if you have specific needs, make sure you have specific notes. It's really helpful. It's not just to make your co-packer's life easier, it makes your life easier for sure, because we can get to the answer right away. Definitely remember you're on a new system. And the same reason why I said I'm not a huge believer in small-scale pilots, it's the same thing, If you've brewed on multiple brew houses, it's not one-to-one. Metrics and key metrics there, on your recipe sheet, those can be hit. There's going to be little tweaks there, so just go into it with an open mind. Maybe take that advice I gave, design a specific and unique SKU for that first run so you can really get to know how your beer tastes translated into this new language. And there's always going to be compromises, just a little bit. Doesn't mean you should compromise quality or the integrity of your product, but just know, 98% on that first go-around is a really great first brew. And then be open with your co-packing partner. Hey, I want to do a brew. I'm not planning on selling it. Can you maybe work with me on tolling fees for this first one? That's a conversation we're always super happy to have. The bane of all of our existences, billing and payables. So now you've got another vendor, and this vendor is going to be pretty big. This is going to be a top 5 payable for you going forward. Be clear in advance on how loss works, aka know what you're getting billed for, not what you assume you're getting billed for. Be very clear about payment terms. Net 30 might be super common, but it's not a law, and it's not a requirement here for doing brewing services. So ask, is there a deposit that's required? Is there a 50% prepayment required, which is very common for starting runs on particular productions? And then this is my favorite one. And I spoke with our chief accountant and CFO earlier today. I said, well, I'm going to put this in the thing. Nobody ever does this, and they would love to talk with you. Don't be afraid of them. I mean, the bill is the bill. It's going to be there, But just double check in. There's a lot of moving parts on both sides of our businesses, right? Invoices go out left and right all the time. Check in. Hey, in March, I got 19 invoices here. Can you verify on your site you're showing them all paid? Yeah, totally. because you're going to find one from like February of last year for $47. Let's get that cleared up and see what we can do in advance. So schedule it quarterly. I can speak for every person who works in payables at any brewery. They would love to schedule that meeting with you, and they will be very cool about it. All right, I'm going to wrap it up so we can ask some questions. But 2 slides, basically solidifying everything here. Does contract work with your story? Super, super important. Know the brand that you put out into the market. Does that work if I'm not the one making it? I think it often does. I think the consumer is changing a lot. And I think that there's a lot of parts of your brand that sell the beer, not just the fact that you make it. That craft story I think is very important. This is just my personal opinion. I don't think that's what customers are necessarily looking for right now exclusively. Think about what does that do for your available time? If I'm not going to be managing a factory anymore, because that's what you all do, it's crazy to like sit back and think about that. Like we run factories. That's not an easy task that dominates your thought processes. What am I going to do with all that other free time? What are those marketing elements I'm really excited about? What are the design elements I'm really excited about? What's that sales route that maybe I was supposed to be covering, but I didn't really have time for it? Or I'd love to go out and support my sales team. That's the trade-off and that's the balance. Right? You can lower your overhead, that's great, but the biggest overhead we all have is time, and we know that. So put that value there. Onboarding time and dialing it in. I can speak for a lot of brewers. I over concerned you, with the first batch blues. Most of the time, it's great, but just be prepared. Maybe I'll need some dialing in time. Who knows? Be thoughtful about your willingness to collaborate and compromise. Maybe you're not compromising quality, but you might compromise on a workflow, and you need to really trust your brewing partner to follow through with that for you. And thoughtful planning is important. That's, I think, maybe the single most important piece here is be introspective. Do I want to plan quarterly and 6 months out, or do I want to have that freedom to be hyper dynamic and decide what I'm going to brew next week, this week? Those I can say definitively are very, very difficult if you're going to enter into a contract agreement. You really need to be thoughtful about what you want and when you want it. So if that seems like something that's empowering for you, you're going to keep the spirit of your beer in contract brewing. If it's not, and that sounds something that's really taxing emotionally to you, then yeah, maybe this isn't the great fit for you. And then the strengths, low, no overhead. I mean, that's killer. You focus on a brand and you focus on sales. No more running a factory, no more worrying about the inherent costs of running that factory. That's also people. I'm not going to glance over that. I've done that myself. Closed a factory to move into a contract relationship is really difficult. I'm going to move on because I'm going to get a little teary about it, to be honest with you. It's rough, but if that's where your destination is, it's better to get on it and do it right. Access to potential bulk savings is such a little thing after we talk about the human weight of moving it, but it's major. Saving a few pennies on your pale malt, it's crazy what that does for you at the end of the year. And if you're going from getting sacks right now on your system, moving up to a silo, that's a huge needle mover for sure. Obviously, time, that's the biggest one. Focus on the other elements of your business. It's amazing. And you got a higher volume for volume growth. You're going to be working with a partner who probably has access to tanks that are 4, 5, 10 times the size of what you were looking at previously. That's an amazing opportunity to scale your core production and all that kind of good stuff. That's all I got for you. We got some questions? Yeah?
Terrific. Great set.
I hope we have some questions. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, it's kind of more of a statement, but Dan, earlier when you were talking about like potential savings with your contract partner, we regularly sell off stuff like mother cartons, single pallets of cans, and stuff like that to our contract clients. Ask your contractor if that's something that they're willing and able to do for you, because you get the ability to then buy at their scale and kind of team up. Helps them out too, because then they're buying that many more. It's driving everybody's price down together.
1,000%. And not to be a commercial for my company, but our sister company is a packaging sales company. It's the whole reason why we exist in that ecosystem, just so we can keep those costs vertical. We didn't really talk about packaging costs, but those are obviously extreme. And small changes like moving to a co-packer who has like tray forming capabilities, that's a big savings as opposed to hand foldage. The amount of corrugate goes down. You pay a sizable discount. Yeah.
Yeah, over here.
What's your recommendation for the line for indemnification? Meaning, I mean, I would think that a high deal level, would be the responsibility of the contractor. But
Yeah.
the contractee, if they put it on a truck that's 80 degrees for 3 days, that should be on them and not on the contractor. So when you're
Totally.
negotiating, not that recalls ever happen, but when you're negotiating a contract, where do you think the market, set is for indemnification?
I don't brew a drop for anyone until we have an agreed upon contract. And if we're not confident on the amount that we're going to come to as an accord for the year, we can make that number very low, but we're signing the contract and we're not going forward until that's done. We have a huge schedule in our contract which outlines what we consider to be standards for all of our QA/QC data. And if we don't hit those numbers, then the very first phone call is you and say, hey, we're at X, Y, and Z. We're going to dump this unless you give us written authorization to get it. I'm very thankful to say I don't make that phone call, but it's incredibly important. Trust is key for sure, but at the end of the day, only paper matters. So if you are working with a partner who is a little bit laissez-faire about their practices and their compliance, that might be a great fit for right now. Just be wary that you're not necessarily set up for success during your growth. So you're kind of moving that problem down the line a little bit. It's got to be in writing for sure, and come to a very even accord about what DO's a deal breaker for sure. Our goal as a co-packer is to get you a product that's going to last as long on a shelf as possible, right? Based within, of course, your metrics for quality and what you need to see. So it's major. It needs to be in writing, and it needs to be very, very clear, and it should be reevaluated. We've done that before. We brought in some fill tech systems that were able to really, really dial in so that you never have a low fill. Cool, no worries. To make that fill tech system work, we actually increased our guarantee for can fills, and we were able to update that in our agreement. So it's a living document, but it has to be a document. If you don't have a contract, you don't have a real partnership for the long term. Might be a good short-term solution, but not a good long-term solution.
Stefan?
I have a few things I'd just like to mention, and adding on to the contract, absolutely. A lot of you will call me and ask, well, do I need a lawyer to do X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I'll say no. Something like this is something I would recommend you hire an attorney to help you hammer out the contract to make sure that both entities, both sides are staying whole in this arrangement. A few other things that I want to say, co-packer. Just so all of you know, the term co-packer has no definition in ABC law. So whatever you are getting made for you by contract, or you're making for someone else by contract, make sure number one that you are legally allowed to make that product, whether it be a beer or a seltzer or a liquor-based seltzer or liquor-based product, right? Make sure that you're able to sell that product, whether you have a microbrewing license, farm brewing license, whatever it is. Make sure that you have the licensing all squared away. Obviously, call me if you ever have questions with any of that. Make sure that's taken care of. And then a few other things to be worrying about or thinking about in contract is who's going to do the brand label approval for the brand. In most cases, if it's your brand, you're obviously still going to want to do the brand label approval, but things like excise tax. Are you paying the excise tax after you take delivery of this? Or is your co-packer, is your contractor, are they the ones that are paying the excise tax and then putting the cost of that into the product, right? That's important to know, and there does need to be a written agreement per the Department of Tax and Finance that you have that figured out who's paying the excise tax and that they actually do pay the excise tax. And then lastly, what was I gonna say? Shoot, lost my train of thought there.
I know for a fact everyone in this room has your cell phone number, so they'll just text you later.
Call me at any point in time.
You gotta wait though, because I'll be on the other line asking you these same questions.
I'll think of that. Oh, yes, thank you. It is minimum product. So you were saying running a factory to not.
Oh, yeah, great call.
So for the farm brewing license, if you have a farm brewing license, you are required by law to make 50 barrels of beer annually. That has 6% in your secret ingredients. If you have a microbrewing license, that's 50 barrels with ingredients from anywhere. If you have both those licenses, That's 100 barrels of beer that you must make at your licensed facility every year. A contract brewer cannot do that for you.
Yeah.
So if you're going to keep a manufacturing license, you are not getting rid of your requirement to brew at least 50 or 100 barrels of beer, depending on which licenses you have. So
Yeah.
keep all of those things in mind when you're doing this. But everything else up there, I couldn't agree with more.
Yeah.
Great job, man.
And that licensed jujitsu is one of my favorite games, and Steph and I talk about it all the time. Like, there's a lot of requirements, and I'm definitively not a lawyer, for sure. We could have an entire 3-hour session on just the mechanisms that make it work, but I'm going to go back to your exceptional question. It's contract brewing.
Yeah.
The important word comes first. You know, you got to have a very clear idea. You know, like the excise tax is a great question. You know, we bill it and we charge it as a pass-through, but we're the one filing it for you because we're the actual brewer on that. That's not a golden rule for every co-packer, you know, so you need to be very, very clear on that. I've heard of co-packers that charge like a handling fee on paying the excise tax. We were chatting about that before. That stuff drives me crazy personally, but you know, it's a business. There's a lot of different ways that gets.
And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you operate completely as a contract, never as an alternating proprietorship.
Exactly, yeah.
Some of Stefan's scenarios, maybe there's a workaround where,
These are not my scenarios.
well, the ones you mentioned,
Boo this man!
some of the scenarios mentioned, a host brewery could potentially meet the farm brewing requirement for you if it's your only operating, if it's your only license, right? Like a tenant can hold a brewing license in a host brewery and does not have to have an independent facility.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
And we can talk about distributors too, but we're not gonna have time for that either. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I did want to talk about was your, you hit on it with loss.
Uh-huh.
Is the cost of when goods get either destroyed or lost when in transit.
Mhm.
That is it's slightly different than being destroyed
Totally.
at the facility. Make sure you're having a conversation about
Yeah.
that.
And
Yeah.
simple question, are you an FOB facility?
Yeah, and the question about indemnification.
Yeah, absolutely. Ours is
For
4
us,
pages long.
it's
Yeah.
it's a hard line at the dock, at our dock. Use our dock.
Absolutely.
Use our dock. It's yours.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then that's unfortunately happened. If you said like, hey, what are the actual conflicts that you have? Everybody's got a horror story, and I've got mine. I'm proud of the way it was handled, and I'm proud of the work we did to make it right. But bad things happen. We've got to be aware of that. We're all businesses. We're real people. There's accents. There's problems. 90 out of 100 issues are shipping, and I hate it because all I can do is like, I can probably guess who your insurance company you should be calling. And that's really the extent of how I can help you here. We put it on, the BOL is signed. It's like it was never even here. You know? So another great question to get into the real meat and potatoes of it. How many layers of wrap do you put on a standard pallet? Do you use corner wraps?
These are great questions. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, let me see a picture of a finished pallet, because the number of pallets I've seen come in from other places where the wrap starts on case 1, oh baby, no, you're done. You just made a lot of beer soup in a truck somewhere. It's done, so yeah.
Yeah.
In your experience with the deposit range, taking a deposit?
Yeah.
What is the range typically, or?
Several years ago at CBC, and he's here walking around, I asked a question using hard numbers in front of Bart Watson, and he yelled at me in front of a very large room of people. So I'm not going to give you a hard number. It's very variable. I can tell you how we generally work is it's a flat dollar amount, unless you are contracting an exceptionally large batch. We also co-pack for NA products, a lot of NA products. NA products don't have the same necessary oversight agencies. For those, often we will require 50% prepayment and 50% due on the final bill of goods. Yeah, it ranges, and I'm not gonna lie, it's negotiable, for sure. I would always expect you to get hit with one that's probably bigger than you want when you first start. And when you do your first contract renegotiation, it would be the very first thing I say. Hey, we've been working together for a year.
You've been a great partner.
Yeah, been a great partner. I would really use that cash to help grow my business, not just be sitting in your account doing nothing. So yeah.
I've been in a contract before, and we had two different opinions on the quality of the beer. Obviously, that comes down to the contract, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had any insights on having two different opinions on the quality of the beer and
Totally.
who's at fault.
Yeah, that's really hard. Very likely, the agreement that you signed with your co-packer is going to define what's acceptable, and it's going to be based on metrics. So a good contract should really take as...
But what about sensory on that?
Yeah, I know, it's totally...
Because, I mean, obviously, there's metrics of, well, where we fall in for final gravity, pH, all that, but in terms of any of the DOs, but for sensory,
Yeah.
that's a completely different.
It's really tough. It's really tough. I find in my experience, I don't know how many thousands of batches have come through the system. If the metrics are there, we're never going to be that far off. But we're always going to be off, and that 3% difference is really what I kind of call the spirit of the beer, the soul of the beer. It's a process of conversation for sure. I know I'm giving you a non-answer because it is a non-answer. Yeah, absolutely. It's really tough. If you're a great customer and we've been working together, we've got trust, we have good business, very likely it's just going to be a mulligan, just like if you say so, that's great. If we just started working together, we really nailed it on all the metrics, and then it's like, I don't know, I don't think so. It's a different conversation. And it's going to come down to partnership. I take a lot of pride in us. We lose money on agreeing on emotional things sometimes, but that's not a sustainable business model. And at some point, that point comes up pretty quick. It's like, I think the only solution here is that we pay this invoice and we talk about what our future is. Yeah.
Devin?
Just a little bit to expand on Owen's question. There's also options for, a third-party arbiter to come in and kind of do a sensory panel with a couple different products to determine, is the difference really there? Somebody who doesn't really have skin in the game on either
Totally.
side.
Yeah.
Taste the products, taste a couple products, maybe triangle test or something like that, can say.
It's pretty much why he has to go to a commercial third party too.
Yes,
That's your
absolutely. A
distributor.
commercial third party is what I'm
Because they're gonna generally they're equally incentivized.
Right.
They don't want to
White
lose.
Labs has a sensory panel service.
Totally, yeah.
But the customer should also be careful too. They're coming off maybe a nano brewery.
Yeah.
They're gonna say, I want 10 pounds of hops in there.
Oh,
on
yeah.
our system, on our system, it's more efficient, and we try to warn them not to turn around and put times 10. And they don't listen to us. They want it anyway, and then it comes out bitter as hell because it's more efficient. So they have to be able to listen to also the contractor that has the experience on the system.
Teamwork
Part of
makes the
that
dream
trust.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the trust. Yeah, 100%. I ran a brewery, like I said, for a long time, and we dumped one batch of beer. It's when we bought our new brewery. We came in, we brewed on the system. We told the brewer who had been brewing on that system for 4 years, this is how we do it, and that's how you're gonna do it. Straight down the drain. And that was a huge part of it. It's just the efficiencies are different. If you don't feel like you can trust the brewer, then you just move right on to the very next co-packing partner, because that's just the end of it. Doesn't matter what the metrics or the QA/QC is. Like if you don't have the trust, it's never going to work, because you're going to get delivered probably perfect beer at one point, and you're still going to be shaky about it, like, oh, I don't know. So it's a relationship. We're human beings, no matter how good the contract is, we still have to have that mutual trust and awareness. Yeah. Did you have a question on that too?
It was kind of like a follow-up of that. I was curious how often the co-packer decides to dissolve that relationship versus the one having the beer contracted. I'm sure it goes both ways.
This one's for you, baby.
There's every kind of customer, there's every kind of
Yeah,
host.
for sure.
And you might learn early that it's not a good fit.
Totally. I unfortunately...
Be lucky if you learn it early, actually.
Yeah, that is very true. I can tell you, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise, what happens when there's a sensory disagreement. You don't have a sensory disagreement with 4 different customers. It's one customer. And that's when it just is time for the conversation. Here's the metrics, and here's what we've delivered. Here's your notes and emails and Slacks from the last 4 months, and you have not said a positive thing. It's like, I'm more than happy to dissolve this right now because you don't have any faith, and so we're never going to be able to deliver and move on to it. I'm also happy to say, it's always my policy, give the worst possible outcome so that we can talk about how that makes sense. And then all of our successes are, it's just gravy after that. But the opposite happens all the time. We have customers who come in, and especially like with loggers and getting to brew it not on a 5-barrel FV, but now you're brewing it at 100 barrels and it's just, it's a bigger system with really great fresh yeast, and they come back and they're like, oh, it's legitimately better than it was. I don't know. I'm proud to say we get that all the time. It's awesome. You get to really tap into more experience, more expertise, another set of eyes to really help you take that vision to the next step. It's not all about compromise at all. I just want everybody to be prepared for it, because those are the realities of entering into a business agreement with another creative entity. Most of the time, oh man, it's going to be awesome. You're going to get really great product.
And you should have the opportunity to protect yourself against a lot of those eventualities. And Dan stressed it being a contract, being the first word. My attorney is in the room here. And it's really important for both sides to protect themselves against any scenario you can imagine.
That comment about that Stefan made, like you need to have your lawyer review. You need to have your lawyer review it. If for no other reason, when somebody kicks me back a contract with no comments, be like, this looks great. Like, oh, you're going to be a problem. I just no, right away. Secondly, also...
all red line.
Wait, your lawyer kicks it back and they want to just change the verbiage. Or like, oh, you use here but for. I don't use that. Like, oh, man, this is my Saturday night. I'm going to be hitting yes, except on 75,000 corrections. But no, it's extremely important for sure. You're entering into somebody who's going to ultimately have a lot of influence on the success of your business, both in terms of its quality, but its deliverables, and also somebody you're going to be working with really, really closely. And when you have a breakup, which happens unfortunately sometimes, it's really nice to have a contract to fall back on. So at some point you can just shake hands and be like, I love you, you're the best, I can't wait to have a beer with you. I'm out, or the paperwork's going to take over from now on, and have that clean baseline.
I saw one or two other hands. Yeah.
I'm afraid to say this after that follow-up, but I am an attorney that does a lot of these contracts, and
Stop redlining me.
but I wanted an interesting follow-up to what Stefan has. Is a lot of people call me and they have their own brand and they don't want to produce it. They just want to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
They have to make their 100 barrels if they're getting both licenses. But the one thing I tell them, that doesn't have to be the stuff you sell.
Mm-hmm.
It can be your test batches. Use it for your Christmas party if that's
Totally.
what you want. Use it for personal consumption. You need to make it, you need to record it, you
Mm-hmm.
need to pay excise tax on it, but if what you want to sell is a better quality stuff from a contract brewer, 100% of what you can sell can be contract brewed, as long as you're making some, even if you just want to water your plants to live.
Yeah.
So that
Kill slugs.
Very good. It says you have to brew 50 barrels.
Yeah,
It's not saying you have to
yeah.
sell 50 barrels.
That is it. So that, I give that advice all the time. But another issue that comes up that you didn't touch on, but I find it cause some hard feelings in the negotiation, has to do with whether they're comfortable giving the DBA to the contract brewer who needs it for label approval if they're doing it. That's number one. Number two, a lot of people get upset that the producer needs to be on the label, that town and
Yeah.
the city.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm having it made in Utica, but I'm in Rochester and I wanted to say Rochester, New York, and you can't.
Yeah.
And that sometimes has to
That's
be
a federal
discussed.
law.
Yeah.
But it's something that people spend a lot of time
Totally.
fighting about. There's a lot of distrust. They think you're gonna take their brand and do
Yeah.
something with
It's that brand story. Be thoughtful about it. Yeah.
force you for people to realize it's contract brewing, that you have to file the DBA for the brand.
Right.
And your city and state needs to go on the can of the.
Yeah. Our space has been a contract house at our address for 14 years. I think Jeremy's in the back somewhere here. Yeah, Clifton Park, New York is shorthand for this guy contract brewed. I feel for anybody in New York now. Yeah. So yeah, it's true. Be thoughtful of it. There's no way around it. Absolutely. You're not lying to your customers. You can't do it. And you're definitely not lying to the federal government or the state. You can't do it.
Can't you put both? You can put both of your like statements
Yeah.
on there. Can't you? You can put brewed by XYZ Brewing,
Totally.
Rochester, New York, by blah 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 Brewing.
Yeah,
Utica,
I'm
New York.
curious. You do this too.
Yeah.
In my experience, that's actually the last choice that people have. They feel I've heard feedback like that's
Yeah.
the biggest finger saying that I'm contracted.
Yes, not a
Maybe
lot of people
would just
do it,
skip
but-
over or think, oh, their office is in
Well-
X, Y, or Z. But yeah,
But don't rule out the possibility that that also gives you, the contractee, a little bit of insurance too.
Sure.
With your own brand. You're
Totally.
putting it out there and saying, look, someone else is making this for us. Should your contractor mess up a batch of beer, it's out there very plainly that someone else really screwed that
Yeah.
up. Wasn't you.
I did a 2 address on one of my brands for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
It was the right fit, but it's rarer.
Yeah, it's whatever works for
Yeah, totally.
whatever brand.
Anything else? Well, thank you, Dan. This was excellent.
Thoughtful.
Thank you, everybody.